I recently dealt with something no husband should ever have to say out loud. My wife got punched in the face by a pretend HOA cop. And the reason? Unauthorized fence height. They said it didn't comply with HOA visibility standards. Funny thing is, the only thing that didn't comply was his nose with the rest of his face. Let me start from the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. She hit the ground hard. No scream, no gasp, just a sickening crack of bone against grass-packed earth. And for half a second, everything stopped. Birdsong, wind, my thoughts. She was lying there, my wife, bleeding from the nose, eyes wide, one palm scraping at the lawn like her brain was trying to reboot reality. And the man who did it stood over her like he just handed her a parking ticket. "You're in violation," he said flatly. Section 7, Unauthorized fence height. But it didn't start with a punch. It started with me in the garage, half listening to a podcast and fixing a hinge we'd been warned about for excessive structural confidence. I remember thinking, only in this neighborhood does a fence count as a threat. Lena was in the backyard, yoga mat out, peace mode activated. She does that when things get tense. Says it calms her nerves. I think she does it for me more than for her. Then came the boots. 3 sets, hard, heavy, like they were here to extract someone, not measure property lines. Black tactical vests, earpieces, HOA patches that looked printed on a cricket by someone who's never done a push-up. I heard the voice first. "Ma'am, we need to confirm elevation compliance." Then Lena's voice, calm, dry. "Is that code for get off my property?" That's when I walked out. Saw the scene. 3 goons in uniform cosplay. One with a clipboard, one with a GoPro on his chest, and Karen, age 58, across the street, standing on her porch like she was directing an episode of Law and Order, Lawn Unit. "You're obstructing perimeter visibility," clipboard guy said. Lena stood up. "We got a notice. We appealed. It's pending." Pending doesn't mean compliant. Neither does impersonating a public officer. He stepped closer. She didn't move. And then he punched her, right there on the lawn. A full-grown man in tactical gear hit a woman, my wife, for defending a fence. I froze. Not because I'm weak, because I've been here before. Fall 2011. Rookie in my unit didn't act fast enough when a guy reached for something in his jacket. It cost 2 lives. That moment never left me. And now, here it was again. But this time, it was Lena. The wrench in my hand dropped, clanged once on the concrete. Then I moved. By the time I got to her, she was on her knees, steadying herself. Blood trickled down her lip. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She looked up and said, "That's going to bruise." I turned to the man. "You hit a combat medic for defending a fence." He shrugged. She resisted compliance. Karen's voice drifted in, syrupy and smug. "She's obstructing the neighborhood line of sight. That's a safety issue." "Karen," I said without looking, "film this next part. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." Lena spat blood into the grass and stared up at the man. "You swing at me again," she said, voice low, "I won't wait for backup." The man's bravado cracked for half a second. Threatening an official, he began. Benji, age 32, stepped between them, rake ready. "You punched a medic, genius. You think we're scared of your clipboard cosplay?" The guy squared up. I didn't move. Lena stood, shook her arms out. "I'm good." The man took a step back. Maybe because I stepped forward. "You assaulted a veteran," I said, "on her property, without legal authority, in front of a camera, while wearing an unregistered uniform." He opened his mouth to argue. I cut him off. "You're not enforcing anything. You're pretending." Karen smirked. "We're simply encouraging compliance." "Great," I said. "Let me encourage you to leave before you add felony to your resume." They backed off like bullies who just realized the skinny kid knows jujitsu. Lena turned to me, still steady. "Do I look broken?" "No," I said, but they're going to be. That night, I pulled out the HOA manual, every word, every loophole, every outdated clause. And then I found it. Page 87, Section 12C, enforcement representatives must possess written consent of entry signed by the property owner or present formal legal documentation as authorized by a municipal governing body. I read it 3 times. Then I underlined it in red. They didn't have a warrant. They didn't have consent. And now they didn't have a clue what was coming. Karen declared war using a bylaw. She made it about fences. Now it was about lines. And I was going to show her what happens when she crosses mine. Next stop, paper trail and the trap waiting at the end of it. Lena looked in the mirror, touched the swelling under her eye, and grinned. That's going to look real cute in tomorrow's HOA meeting. Her voice was calm, even amused. The side of her face was purple, her lips split, one nostril packed with gauze, and she was smirking like she'd just won something. I stood behind her, towel in hand, barely breathing. "You're not supposed to look like you enjoyed that," I muttered. She tilted her head, studying the bruise. "I didn't enjoy the punch. I'm enjoying the reaction." "What reaction?" "Yours." She was right. I hadn't stopped shaking since it happened. Not visibly, but inside, my blood ran like wire, tight, humming, ready to snap. Lena pressed an ice pack to her cheek. "It's funny. When I was deployed, you learn to tell who's cracked by how calm they get." I turned away. "I'm not cracked. You're reading the bylaws at 3 a.m. with a highlighter and a tactical pen. It's a nice pen." Downstairs, Benji was cooking bacon with the enthusiasm of a man defusing a bomb made of pork fat. "I made comfort meat," he called out. "This is how my people heal." Lena limped in, still in yoga pants and war paint. Benji looked up and nearly dropped the skillet. "Holy crap, you look like a Bond girl post-explosion. Do we get revenge now or after breakfast?" "Soon," she said, sliding into a chair. "John's got a plan." They both looked at me. I held up a dog-eared HOA manual, the size of a cinder block. Benji groaned. "Of course, you do." We got to work. Every weird citation, every family forced to sell, every contradictory line in the handbook. I was building something, not just a case, a weapon. I wasn't trying to win, I was trying to make them regret playing. Lena pulled up a spreadsheet. 5 families moved out this year alone. 4 were veterans. Benji nodded. And every one of them cited for different reasons. Fence height, parking orientation, unauthorized seasonal decor. I tapped the whiteboard. The pattern isn't the citation, it's the people. They're targeting folks they think won't fight back. Lena leaned in. "But we will." Benji smirked like one of the angry lawn gnomes of justice. Then Karen showed up in the form of a neighborhood email blast. Subject: Community Harmony Update from HOA Board. Karen, in times of unrest, it's important we preserve the beauty and order of our community. Non-compliance threatens that peace. We must remember safety isn't just about locks and alarms. It's about unity, conformity, and trust. "She's threatening us in cursive," Benji muttered. "That's actually impressive." Lena stared at the screen. "She thinks we'll break. That's what she's betting on." She turned to me. "You haven't smiled once since it happened." "I'm not in a smiling face." She stepped closer. "You're too calm. That scares me more than the punch." I met her eyes. "Because now it's a game I know how to win." I spent the next 12 hours drafting, filing, digging into county filings, fake shell companies, the HOA's budget allocations. At some point, I forgot to eat. Benji tried to distract me with flamingo prank ideas. Lena made grilled cheese with tactical precision, but my mind was locked in. At 11:47 p.m., I found it. An old clause in the original HOA charter: external enforcers shall not operate on private property without express consent or verified emergency orders. It was like finding a buried blade. "Got them," I whispered. Lena was already asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket in quiet defiance. Benji dozed off next to a printer that kept jamming every third page. I stood in the dark, holding the document like it was sacred scripture. We had them. All I needed now was an audience. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the mail. There was no envelope, no HOA letter, just a plain manila folder on the doorstep. Inside, a printout of our fence citation. Stapled to it was a photo, not of our lawn, not of the house, of Lena, taken from the hallway, from inside our home. I stared at the grainy image, her back to the camera, just walking. No timestamp, no watermark, and no explanation. My grip tightened, my pulse thudded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Then I flipped the page. Just one line written in red ink, "We're always watching. Compliance begins at home." They broke into my house. Not to steal, not to hurt. Just to let me know they could. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. And now they were about to lose every ounce of it. I tore the house apart. Not angrily, not even fast, methodically, room by room, inch by inch, looking for holes, shadows, anything out of place. The photo of Lena in the hallway wasn't just a warning. It was proof someone had been in our home. Not to steal, not to plant a bomb, to watch. That made it worse. Predators don't always attack. Sometimes they just circle, so you know they're there. I flipped our smoke detectors, removed every outlet faceplate, checked for tiny lenses in the recessed lighting, even cut open the drywall behind our bookshelf, following a gut feeling. Nothing. But the silence after that search, it was deafening. Lena sat at the kitchen island, barefoot, ice on her knee, tracking my movements like a war medic watching someone bleed from the inside. "You're spiraling," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm prepping." Benji showed up with a bag of gas station snacks and 2 rolls of reflective tape. "I brought offerings," he said. "Also, if we're about to Fort Knox this place, I want full nerd access." We started building trip sensors, pressure plates, IR overlays. Not overkill, strategy. I rigged a cheap decoy motion sensor to the front mailbox. We figured if they tripped it, we'd get a silent push alert. The real cameras were hidden in garden gnomes and behind our fake bird bath. Not because I liked it, but because I needed it. Because the moment you realize your home isn't private anymore, you either panic or prepare. That night, at 2:14 a.m., movement. 3 figures, no flashlights, all in black. One with a clipboard, one with a bag, one scanning lawns like he was house hunting with night vision. Liam whispered in the headset, "Why is it always 3 dudes with a clipboard? Is that, like, HOA protocol?" Shh. They moved fast. 2 hopped the neighbor's fence. 1 crouched at our sprinkler control box. Clipboard guy poured something down the line. Chemical sabotage. Homeowners Association warfare. I slipped out the side door. Chloe covered the west fence. Liam activated a fake garage floodlight, just enough to freeze them in place. Clipboard guy bolted. The others split. One made it clean over the alley wall. The other, I caught. Kid couldn't have been more than 20. Not in uniform. Just a gray hoodie and nerves. I pinned him against the fence, one arm twisted behind his back. "You with Karen?" He squirmed. "I'm just part-time, man. I don't know anything." I shoved a flashlight in his eyes. "Smile for the camera." Chloe stepped into view, holding her phone up. "You entered our property, tampered with utilities. That's a felony." He blinked fast. "We were told no one lived here full-time." My blood ran cold. Chloe didn't flinch. "Who told you that?" "Third key," he muttered. "It's a compliance contractor. They get hired to handle removals." "Removals?" I asked. "Look, I just spray the stuff and leave. I don't even know her name." "Karen?" "No," he said. "The lady in charge, she's just called field lead on our forms." Liam's voice crackled in the headset. "Okay, I just cross-referenced that company. They've filed under 5 different LLCs in 3 states. This isn't an HOA. It's a flipping eviction cartel." I let the kid go. "Next time," I said, "I won't be the one asking questions." He ran, vanishing into the dark. Back inside, Chloe inspected the sprinkler box. Oily. Smells like metal. She dabbed it with a rag. Copper sulfate. Root killer. They were poisoning our yard. Long game kill, she said. Once the plants die, they'll fine us for neighborhood degradation. I sat down hard. This wasn't about rules. It was about deconstruction. Quiet, slow, one dead tree at a time. At dawn, a new notice appeared on our door: violation, vegetative non-compliance, root exposure, and ornamental decay. Immediate attention required. Failure to comply may result in enforced remediation. They had the gall to fine us for the sabotage they committed. I actually left because it meant one thing: they were starting to panic. Later that night, I reviewed the footage again. Then I noticed something strange. The birdhouse camera, the one I'd found planted in the neighbor's yard, had moved. Its angle no longer faced our home. It faced Karen's. A perfect line of sight into her upstairs office. And the feed was still active, still streaming, but not to us. Whoever set it up didn't want to watch us anymore. They wanted Karen, which meant we weren't the only ones playing this game. And whoever else was watching, they weren't on our side. I followed the signal back through the feed metadata. Not an HOA server, not a neighbor, not even local. It was bouncing through 6 nodes, encrypted. Someone with real resources was watching her. And if Karen was the field lead, then who was the one giving her orders? At 2:36 a.m., my server pinged me with a red alert. Not from my own system, from someone else's. A mirrored file directory I didn't recognize. Hidden inside a housing app the HOA used for amenity scheduling. It wasn't requesting pool hours. It was tracking us. I cracked the encryption in 11 minutes. I was fast because I was angry, focused because fear sharpens faster than caffeine. Liam was snoring on the couch like a dying leaf blower. Chloe was upstairs asleep in a tank top and nursing bruises. The photo of her from the hallway still burned in my skull. The file was titled Compliance Retention Tier Index. I opened it. Rows of names and addresses, mortgage balances, branch of service. Column C was labeled Risk Factor, high, moderate, low. Next to Chloe's name, high. Next to mine, unrecoverable. And beside that, requires escalation if not vacated by Q3. I didn't breathe for 10 seconds. Then I read line by line, 43 entries. Veterans, widows. A few quiet retirees with big equity and small support systems. Most of them I knew. One of them used to teach my son to fish. Another gave out caramel apples at Halloween. A woman 3 doors down baked cinnamon bread every Sunday. I never asked her name. They weren't rebels. They weren't loud. They were targeted. I stared at one line too long and realized it was my name. Liam shuffled awake and blinked at the screen. "Dude, what am I looking at?" "This isn't an HOA," I said. "It's a spreadsheet for soft evictions." Chloe appeared in the doorway, holding her phone and wearing the kind of stillness you only learn in combat zones. She glanced once at the screen, then again slower. "That's Mrs. Henderson," she said. "They made her rip out her rose garden last month. She cried when they took the shovel out of her hands. And look," Mike said, pointing at another row. "They ranked her passive acceptant." "What does that even mean?" "It means they thought she wouldn't fight back," Sarah whispered. I couldn't look at her because the truth was simple and shameful. They weren't wrong. We called a meeting. Not a town hall, not a rally, just the people already marked. The ones we could still reach before the trap snapped shut. Mr. Alvarez came with 2 folders of his own. Complaints he never filed because he thought no one would listen. Mrs. Patel showed up wearing sunglasses and a scarf. She'd been egged last week. She said she didn't want them to know she'd left the house again. The Mitchells walked in like ghosts. No words, just nods. Mike opened his laptop and projected the file onto the garage wall. I stood in front of it like I was briefing a team before a breach. "You're all on the list," I said. "And they're coming for you next. Not with trucks, not with guns, but paperwork, contractors, and legal trapdoors." Alvarez spoke first. "How long?" "Some of you have 2 weeks, others less." Patel looked down at her hands. They told me my lawn statue was spiritually misaligned with community tones. I thought they were just being cruel. They were, Sarah said, and calculated. Mike flipped to a financial tab. They've mapped your equity. They know who can be squeezed quietly and who needs a scare tactic. Alvarez raised a hand. What do they get from this? A return? I said. Most of these homes will flip with a six-figure margin after foreclosure. Patel shook her head. I thought this was my last home. Sarah crossed the room, knelt beside her, and gently took her hand. It still can be. That afternoon, Karen showed up at our door. No clipboard, no fake smile, just her and something new behind her eyes. Not confidence, desperation. You've been busy, she said. Sorry, I said. Didn't schedule this conversation through the app. She ignored it. I know what you've seen. You mean the evidence? I mean the structure, the system. Her voice dropped. It wasn't supposed to be visible. You hit a for-profit foreclosure racket behind garden bylaws. Don't be dramatic, Sarah said, appearing beside me, arms crossed. Tell that to the widow they labeled pushy. Karen blinked once, and in that one blink, I saw the fear. The kind you get when the script runs out. You're a soldier, John, she said. You understand top-down chains. This isn't yours to stop. No, I said, but it's mine to expose. Then she leaned forward and whispered something just for me. They told me if I kept things quiet, I'd get to keep my home. That was the deal. And who's they? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, I reviewed the birdhouse camera feed. Karen's office still lit, still she paced. She was on the phone, frantic now. Her movements no longer queenly, they were prey-like. Then, in the reflection of the window behind her, a man. Not a reflection, a presence. Broad-shouldered, gray suit, standing still, watching her from behind. And on his right hand, a ring. Military issue, special clearance, identical to the ones worn by top-level briefers when I was stationed at Coronado Naval Amphibious Base. Sarah looked over my shoulder and whispered, You know him? No, I said, but I know what he represents. Mike leaned in. So Karen's not running the show? No, I said. She's barely even staff. This wasn't a rogue HOA. It was a vet filtering pipeline, a housing chessboard. And Karen was just the pawn they let feel powerful right before they sacrificed her. And the man in that reflection, he wasn't part of the HOA. He was part of something federal. Next move was ours. Karen knew I was coming. She just didn't know how loud I'd be or how many people would follow me through that door. I didn't wait for the meeting to start. I didn't take a seat. I walked right down the center aisle like I owned the place. Because for the first time, I did. Not legally, but morally. Everyone in that room knew the truth had finally shown up. Karen stood behind her little podium, draped in lavender and fake grace. Microphone clipped on, HOA seal behind her. But her face, that smile, was fighting to hold its shape. She saw Sarah first, then me, then the folder in my hand. John, she said, voice smooth, if you'd like to speak during open comments, we'll get to that shortly. Sure, I said. Right after we expose your racketeering. That got her. A few neighbors gasped. A woman near the snack table dropped her lemon bar. Mike flicked his phone, and the projector behind Karen glitched, then burst into the spreadsheet. The list, names, addresses, mortgage balances, risk factors. Every eye turned toward the screen. Karen's mask slipped, not shattered, but dented. I don't know where this came from, she began. Sarah stepped forward. You wrote on it. She held up the printed margin. Check status of lot 312. Wife is pushy. A man in the third row stood. That's my house. A younger woman near the back raised her hand, trembling. My mom's name is on there too, she said. She passed away 2 months ago. But the citations kept coming. You billed her for a lawn she hadn't stepped on. Weeks. Gasps. One man cursed under his breath. Mike muttered, she's not just stealing homes. She's billing corpses. Karen's hands fluttered helplessly. We don't control the billing process. That's your signature, I said, clicking the projector. A blown-up PDF filled the screen, digitally timestamped, ugly. Karen started. This has been taken out of context. Put it back in, I said. Tell us what context justifies targeting veterans and widows for financial extraction. Silence. Then another voice. She fined me 4 times for my mailbox paint. And me, a woman added, said my garden gnome was behaviorally inappropriate. Mike whispered, I don't even know what that means. Karen cleared her throat. The HOA exists to preserve order, protect property values, and ensure a welcoming environment. Welcoming for who? Sarah said. No response, so I answered for her. For people who don't ask questions, for buyers who won't challenge forged citations or mysterious fines. I stepped away from the screen, turned to the crowd, and held up the folder. Everything in here, I said, was built to break you. Quietly, legally, with a smile. A murmur swept through the room. Not just outrage, but clarity. You could feel it, the snap. They weren't afraid anymore. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. Alvarez stood. Is this why my last appeal got lost? Mrs. Patel rose next. She told me my front steps were a hazard. Then the HOA offered to buy me out. Karen looked around the room. She had no friends left, just neighbors she'd manipulated for years and suddenly couldn't control anymore. Then she tried a different angle. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, secure, stable. Tears welled up, fake, controlled. I didn't want to do this, but there are people above me. You don't understand the pressure. We do, I said. You made sure we all felt it. The treasurer stood. I'm done, he said. I never agreed to any of this. The secretary followed. You told us this was about safety. This is fraud. Karen reached out as they walked away. Please don't let him twist. No one twisted anything but the bylaws, the treasurer shot back. Then I walked to the projector and switched to the second file. Emails in her name, contract authorizations, confidentiality clauses, payout structures. Sarah read them aloud, one by one. By the third, half the room was filming. By the fourth, 2 board members walked out. Karen backed away from the podium slowly. I need a break. You need a lawyer, Sarah said. The room broke into scattered applause. Not wild, just solid. Like everyone finally exhaled after holding their breath for a year. Back home, we sat in silence. No celebration, no high fives, just relief. Mike typed quietly. Facebook stream hit 27,000. Reddit's already grabbing clips. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, her Glock beside her. You okay? I asked. She looked up. Not yet, but she was close. Then a knock at the door. We all stood, but it wasn't for us. 2 blocks over, a black sedan rolled to a stop outside Karen's house. 2 men stepped out. Not police, not city code, federal. They walked up her driveway. Karen answered in her robe, smile already dialed in. Can I help you? One of them opened a badge. We couldn't hear what they said, but we saw what they did. They stepped inside, uninvited, unstoppable. Karen didn't stop them, because some queens don't go out screaming. They go out in silence. That night, I got an email. No subject, no sender, just 1 sentence, nice work. Ready for the next round? And below it, a file labeled Tier 2 Active Development Zones. There were dozens of neighborhoods, and Oakgate was just the prototype. I didn't know what was worse, the fact someone sent me a classified surveillance file, or the fact they had footage of me opening it before I even hit play. That's not a metaphor. There I was on screen in my kitchen, from a camera I didn't install. I hadn't even broken the encryption yet. And whoever sent the file already had the sequel. The email had no name, no subject, just a single sentence, nice work. Ready for the next round? Attached, Tier 2 Vault.mpp4. The file was locked behind 512-bit encryption, military grade. Not the kind your average Reddit sleuth could crack. The kind that says, "You were never supposed to see this." Mike sat beside me, chewing on a pen cap like it was a grenade pin. "Please tell me this is a phishing joke." "Nope." "Then tell me you're opening it on a burner rig and not the home Wi-Fi." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a Faraday case, slotted in a drive with no OS tether, and fed the file through 3 layers of sandbox to decrypt. It opened slower than it should have, almost like it didn't want to be found. What we saw when it did changed everything. Karen in her home office, nighttime. No clipboard, no pastel intimidation, just her alone, staring at a glowing laptop. Her voice sounded smaller, nervous. Then the man spoke. Not on screen, not local. The kind of voice that never shows up in public records. "We're behind on Oakgate. Lot 312 was scheduled last quarter, Karen. They filed an appeal." I couldn't push without it looking suspicious. Irrelevant. The wife's flagged high interference. Former military medic classification. I need more time. Board 7's already blown. Felon was compromised. We need clean transitions. Karen hesitated. "There's a kid on the property." Then write the narrative. Safety hazard. Structural rot. You know how to make it stick. Sarah flinched. I hit pause. Mike let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Jesus. Sarah didn't move. "Play it again," she said, voice flat. I pressed play. "We signed off on Riverbend," Karen muttered. I lost sleep over that. Riverbend was a beta test. Oakgate is a corridor acquisition. Your task is to transition resistance or vacate your position. You promise me protection. Deliver results and you'll be shielded. Then static, then silence. Later that day, I drove 2 counties over to a contact I hadn't seen in years. Foster. Former JAG, ex-military legal, still smoked indoors, still didn't blink. He watched the tape 3 times, no expression. Then he leaned back, lit his cigarette, and said, "This isn't HOA fraud. This is organized displacement of protected class citizens under the guise of regulatory enforcement. In English, you've got felony conspiracy. RICO. If you release this, you won't just burn the HOA." He tapped the screen. "You'll burn whoever's above her. You think we should sit on it? I think you'd better be ready when the pushback comes. Whistleblowers don't always get applause. Sometimes they get audited or disappeared." Sarah stood. "We're already being watched." He didn't argue. "Then start documenting. Chain of custody, source verification, and whatever you do, don't let this vanish into hearsay." The neighborhood barbecue was Sarah's idea. No signs, no flyers, no HOA oversight, just folding chairs, music, and a projector pointed at a garage door. Mike wired up the video. I didn't introduce it. We just played it. Karen's voice echoed through the cul-de-sac, calm, calculated. Then the man's voice, flat and surgical, told her to write the narrative. Mrs. Patel dropped her drink. A kid across the street whispered, "That's our fence." A woman gasped when she saw her late husband's name listed on a printed document we passed out. "He died last year," she whispered. They still cited him for having unauthorized foliage. No one cheered when the video ended. They just stood there, shell-shocked, finally seeing what we'd all been standing on. A trap. That night, a second message arrived. This one had a name, Director Van. It read, "Your tape just kicked a hornet's nest. We're not the only ones watching. Watch your 6." Attached, one photo. A black SUV. Parked across the street from my house. Lights off, windows tinted. Zoom in. Inside the reflection of the windshield, faint but visible, was a lit phone screen. And on that screen, a paused video of me sitting at the kitchen table. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I was scared, but because I finally understood something. Karen was never the queen. She was the bait. And whatever was behind that camera was coming next. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop picturing that phone screen in the reflection, paused on me in my kitchen, doing nothing, completely unaware. That's the kind of image that doesn't keep you up. It rewires you. Because if they had that shot, what else did they have? We argued in the kitchen. Mike wanted to pack up and vanish for a week. No shame in playing ghost, he said. This isn't your average HOA vendetta. This is black bag territory. Sarah disagreed. We don't run, she said, tying her hair back. We flush them out. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at the photo again. Same SUV, same angle, same arrogance. You know what this reminds me of? I finally said. Kandahar. The convoy that never turned their lights off. Just drove through the valley like they owned it. Mike frowned. What happened to them? Sarah smiled. They exploded. So we set a trap. I became the bait. 8:15 a.m. I stepped out the front door with a coffee mug and a fat manila envelope tucked under my arm. Mike watched from the roof. Sarah followed at a distance, hoodie up, sleeves rolled. The envelope empty except for a note written in Sharpie, "Hope you're enjoying the view." I walked 1 block, took 2 lefts, and ducked into the hardware store. Mike whispered in the comms, "They bit. Engine on. Turning around the corner now. Slow. Watching." The SUV circled twice before easing to a stop outside the store. Tinted windows, same vehicle, same silent menace. Driver's late 40s, Mike said. Trim military posture, aviators like a textbook. Passengers masked? Armed? Hard to say, but they're not here to sell cookies. For you, a free like is easy. But for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. I took a breath, walked out right toward them. 10 steps in, my palms were sweating, felt like Fallujah. Not because of the weather, but because I didn't know if I'd be standing 5 minutes later. At 5 feet, the driver stepped out. He didn't draw, didn't speak, just held out a photo. Sarah at the grocery store, smiling, holding a cantaloupe. Behind her, a man with a hand inside his coat. Printed, creased, not new. I stared at it, rage building like a pressure valve. You think you can scare us off with surveillance? I said. The man smiled. Cold, reptilian. This isn't surveil. Try that again. You've crossed into something bigger than city councils and garden citations. You're standing in federal corridors now. Real people are paying attention. He leaned against the car like we were just 2 neighbors chatting about lawn care. You think you are the first one to dig? The others, the ones that tried. They're quiet now. You could be too. You don't scare me. That's unfortunate, he said, because we're not trying to scare you. We're trying to measure your temperature. He pulled something from his coat. Not a weapon, a file folder. Inside, old photos, grainy, a surveillance image from years ago. Me in uniform, walking out of a classified logistics site, dates marked. You were on a list before this even started, he said. Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. John, step back. Don't let him bait you. I stared at the folder, then at him. You always carry this much rope? I asked. He raised an eyebrow. For hanging yourselves, he chuckled. Then he got back in the car and drove off. Back at the house, Sarah looked through the folder. Slow, focused. This is Lam's style, she said. Covert psych warfare, target memory triggers. He likes to make his opponents question what they remember. Who is he now? Mike piped in from the hallway. He's listed as a development consultant on 3 different housing boards, all shell orgs, all operating in test markets, I said. I said nothing. I was too busy noticing the boot print on the porch. Fresh, muddy, facing inward, like someone had stood there and watched us sleep. Then the lights went out. Front yard, backyard, all at once. Not a flicker, a kill switch. Sarah grabbed the flashlight. I took the Glock. We stepped outside slowly. No voices, no movement. Then she stepped in something. Wet, slick, sticky. She aimed the flashlight down. Red paint sprayed across the sidewalk in huge, dripping letters, "Stand down." And beneath it, a boot print. Military issue. Same tread Sarah remembered from Fort Huachuca. I stared at that paint like it was written in blood. They weren't just warning us. They were testing us. And we just failed the silence test. Because now they knew we weren't going to back down. And we knew they weren't bluffing. There's a moment in every op when your gut whispers, this one's going to leave a mark. But sometimes the mark isn't on your body. It's in your silence. Kirkuk, Iraq. 6 clicks outside the green zone. We were stacked behind a crumbling brick wall, eyes on a 2-story safe house lit only by a single red bulb in the stairwell window. Our target was inside, allegedly a Tier 3 asset smuggled out of Mosul. At least that's what the intel's packet said. Kessler was at my left, tall, loud, borderline inappropriate humor, but smart when it counted. He checked his suppressor and muttered, "If this guy doesn't exist, I'm putting in for hazard pay and a punch card." 5th op this month, I said. You'd think command could afford a map that wasn't drawn in crayon. He grinned. You're just mad you haven't gotten shot at in a week. Let's keep that streak going. The door breach was textbook. 1 bang, 1 pop, 1 crash. But the room? Wrong. Too quiet. No weapons, cash. Just blankets. A torn prayer mat. A child's plastic toy in the corner. 2 women froze in the kitchen. A boy stood between them. Maybe 10, maybe less. He stepped forward, arms out. No fear, just defiance. Kessler raised his weapon. So did I. Radio clicked. Our unit leader barked, "Engage." Hostiles present. But I saw the boy's eyes. Wide, wet, unblinking. I didn't shoot. I froze. Trigger finger hovering. Not weak. Deliberate. And that's when the back door blew. The blast ripped through the hallway. Shrapnel turned drywall into shrapnel. My left ear went deaf. I hit the ground hard. Screams. Metal. Then silence. I rolled over and saw Kessler's boot first, then his leg. The rest of him gone. My hand shook. I couldn't move. I looked at the kid. Still standing, still blocking. He hadn't moved. I used to replay it in my head every night. Not the explosion, not the sound, the weight of my trigger finger. I remember it trembling. Not because I was scared, but because it wanted to move and didn't. Some part of me thought if I waited, if I gave it one more breath, one more beat, a new order would come. It never did. And now, 10 years later, every time my hand rests near a weapon, I feel that hesitation echo in my bones. Back at base, I tried to finally report. Detailed, clean, truthful. Command didn't say a word. No hearing, no review, just a reassignment slip on my cot 2 days later. And one note, your commitment is noted. Your discretion is expected. Years later, I still hear that hallway. Still see Kessler's grin fading into dust. I still feel that moment in my shoulder blades, right where the body armor doesn't protect. And now I'm watching it happen again. Different battlefield. Same tactics. Supposedly for community protection. But it's a lie. The same lie they fed us overseas. This is for safety. We're following orders. Don't think, just execute. Sarah knew something was off before I said anything. We were in the garage. She was unboxing a thermal sensor kit. You're flinching. Did I ever tell you about Kirk? Sarah set the gear down. No, but I know what came after. I nodded. There was a kid and a choice. I froze, and Kessler died. She didn't interrupt. I keep thinking if I just reacted, maybe. She stepped closer. You did freeze, she said gently. But that's not weakness. That's humanity. He paid for it. Sarah stepped closer, voice steel-edged now. No. He died because someone up the chain handed you bad intel and told you to treat civilians like coordinates. She grabbed my wrist and placed it over her heart. You feel that? That's why you hesitated. And that's why you're not like them. They want drones. You're not a drone. You're the consequence they forgot to account for. I stared at her, jaw tight. He died because I second-guessed the mission. We all pay, she said. But not all of us remember. That's what makes you dangerous. Later that night, I unlocked the foot locker I hadn't touched in 10 years. Inside, a folded flag, one medal I refused to display. A flash drive marked review only. My hand hovered over the flag, still folded, still crisp. I never let them unfold it at the ceremony. I didn't want their pomp, their speeches. I wanted the silence, the quiet that said, "You know what this cost?" I pressed my fingers into the center crease. It didn't feel like fabric. It felt like debt. I plugged the flash drive into Mike's offline rig. Inside, redacted reports, mine, others. Every soldier who questioned what happened in Kirkuk, silenced, reassigned, scrubbed. And in one of the logs, a contractor listed for post-conflict housing transition initiatives. Name was Lom Ward. They took my voice once. They buried the report, scrubbed the names, and called it a closed file. But now I have their names, and this time, I'm not filing anything. I'm burning it down. You can't outpunch a system. But you can make it choke on its own red tape. We started by rerouting every camera in the neighborhood. Not disabling, hijacking. Every porch ring, every HOA registered nest, even the park's motion sensors. We weren't just watching, we were collecting patterns. Entry logs, vehicle tags, voice recordings from smart intercoms. Karen's little empire wasn't just watched, it was mirrored. And when we had what we needed, we moved. Mike's eyes were bloodshot. Why does this woman use 5 different passwords that are all variations of her cat's name? You're an almost. I've got access to email headers, but the deeper files are password protected inside a sandboxed container. Wait. He froze, then grinned. Sarah, that birthday card she sent herself? Sir Meow-a-Lot turned 6.5 today. Try June 5, 2017. Sarah typed. Click. The vault opened. Inside the HOA's financial backend was a mess of folders, all labeled innocuous, future compliance projects, maintenance overflow fund, community uplift 2023. We cracked one and found transfer logs, contractor payments tied to resale transitions, same companies linked to foreclosures in 3 states, same signature every time, W-LOM. Sarah stood over Mike's shoulder, eyes sharp. This isn't just fraud. No, I said. It's a system. And our house. She nodded. Lot 47. I stared at the screen. They had already filed preliminary paperwork to seize the property under an obscure clause about fence safety. They were going to do it again to us. So we struck first. Step 1, paper push. I filed an injunction with the State Land Board under an obscure clause tied to military veteran protection. Took a few calls, one favor, and a regulation so old they had to fax me a scanned version. By noon, every HOA authorized property transfer was frozen. Step 2, the leak. Mike anonymized the video trail, distributed the data to 2 reporters and a local whistleblower blog run by a retired housing attorney. The post went live that night. 22,000 shares in 3 hours. Step 3, public justice. Community Cleanup Day was Karen's pride and joy. We hijacked it. Set up a projector. No speeches, no flyers, just a screen and silence. Then the tape played. Karen's voice. Lom's. The spreadsheet. The transfers. The crowd shifted from murmurs to shouting. One HOA enforcer tried to yank the projector cable. Mike tackled him with a knee brace and a grin. Sorry, buddy. No cancellations today. Another board member grabbed the mic. This is a smear campaign. These files were doctored. Sarah stepped forward, calm, clear. You want to talk about fake? Let's talk about this. She raised her sleeve, showed the bruise. Gasps. She was punched, someone shouted. Karen stepped onto the platform, voice trembling, smile stapled on. This has all been taken out of context. These are curated clips. You curated fear, I said. Then Mrs. Patel, sweet, cardigan-wearing Mrs. Patel, walked to the mic and lit the match. We've been ruled by silence long enough. Today we speak. The crowd erupted. The enforcer ran. The board collapsed. And Karen? She just stood there, alone. I watched her from the side of the platform. Saw the way her jaw clenched. Her hands fluttered. She wasn't just angry. She was terrified. Not because of what we'd done, but because she realized she was never in control. She was a puppet. And the string had snapped. The knock. Not on my door. Karen's. 2 federal agents. This time, badges shown, cameras rolling. They walked past her fake tears and pastel rope. Boxed everything. 1 server tower, 1 file cabinet marked historical finds, and Karen. She left in cuffs. Neighbors filmed. No one looked away. Later, Sarah found me in the garage. You look calm. I'm not, I said. Just waiting for what comes next. Mike stepped in, holding his laptop. You're going to want to see this. A message. No subject. Just 3 lines, clever, but this isn't over. You just made yourself visible. Sender, W. Lom. I stared at the screen, then closed the lid. If they wanted me in the light, good. Because this time, I wasn't coming with a report. I was coming with a reckoning. And I don't freeze twice. They called it a strategic collapse. That's what the regional compliance report said. But let's be honest, it was a mass execution of bad policy. And Karen's empire got buried in the grave it dug for everyone else. The federal case didn't stop with her. It started with her. Because when Karen flipped, she brought hell with her. She didn't just name names. She gave them a roadmap, and at the top, Wardlom. They got him outside a Marriott in Phoenix. Black SUVs, 3 agents, 1 drone overhead. He was sipping hotel coffee and checking emails on a burner when they closed in. 1 second he was free. The next, cuffed, silent, swarmed. He didn't yell, didn't even blink, just smiled like it was inevitable. But the arresting officer said later that in the backseat of the car, Lom finally spoke. Just 1 line, guess the dogs bite back after all. Back home, the cleanup began. Oakgate wasn't just spared. It rebuilt itself. Mike led a team to reprogram every streetlight camera to face outward, watching for threats, not neighbors. Mrs. Patel became HOA president, unanimously elected. Her first decree, no more fines, only fixes. The kids came back out. Sidewalk chalk returned. So did lemonade stands, 4th of July cookouts, and open garage doors on Saturdays. You could smell the difference. Fresh cut grass, smoked ribs, freedom. We built a new fence, same materials, 1 inch taller. No violations, no notes, no visits, just a quiet nod from the new inspector who handed me the signed approval and said, looks solid. And frankly, so do you. As for Karen, I visited her once. Plexiglass, cold air, county jumpsuit. She looked smaller, paler, the kind of pale that no sun lamp or facial serum fixes. She didn't speak, but her eyes moved down to the table, to the photo I slid across. Sarah at the grocery store. The photo they took. The one that crossed the line. Karen stared at it, then back at me. And for a second, I thought she might try to speak. She did. You don't understand, she whispered. They told me if I didn't. I raised a hand, cut her off. You came from my home. You came for my wife. You thought I wouldn't fight. I leaned in close. But the thing about war is, you never know who the soldier really is until it's too late. She didn't respond, didn't blink. I stood, left the photo, walked out, never looked back. At home, Sarah met me with a beer and a smile that didn't need words. We sat on the porch, watched the neighborhood come alive again. Kids racing bikes down the street. Mrs. Delaney planting a new rose bush. Mike tripping over his own shoelaces, holding a watering can and yelling, I'm an asset to society. And for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel haunted. Didn't feel on alert. Didn't wait for a siren, a knock, a file stamped classified. I just breathed. Because this fight? It ended. No loose ends, no hidden strings, just peace earned, not granted. So yeah, my wife got punched by a pretend cop with a fake badge. They came for our home, our peace, our lives. But in the end, the only thing that didn't comply was my mercy. And now, the HOA doesn't send me letters anymore. They send me silence. And in this neighborhood, that's the loudest kind of respect there is.